23 years ago this week, on July 26, 1998, Fully Loaded aired on pay-per-view from Fresno, California, featuring a dungeon match for the first time ever, with Owen Hart defeating Ken Shamrock with Dan the Beast Severn as the special referee. This was a match taped days in advance from the famous Hart family dungeon in Calgary. The Rock and Triple H, they went to a 30-minute time limit draw in a best out of 3 falls match for the Intercontinental Championship, which I remember being a very good match. Actually, that and their ladder match at SummerSlam back-to-back months turned out to be very good matches. Sable defeated Jacqueline, very famous moment in WWE history. She beat Jacqueline in a bikini contest, but the decision was reversed the next night on Raw because Sable was not exactly wearing a bikini. This is where she wore the handprints on her breasts, and Jerry Lawler basically lost his fucking mind, as I'm sure a lot of the young men watching at the time probably did as well, and became big Sable fans overnight. And The Undertaker, tagging with Stone Cold Steve Austin, won the Tag Team Championships from Kane and Mankind. The following night, on July 27th, live on Monday Night Raw, Stone Cold Steve Austin debuted the Smoking Skull Championship belt. As the story goes, one night on TV, I don't know if he gave somebody a stunner or what happened, but the Big Eagle belt that Austin had been carrying around on TV, it cut him on the chin. And he was looking to, possibly have a new belt made anyway, because he credits the Road Warriors with giving him the idea, hey, you're Stone Cold, you should have your own custom championship. And Road Warrior Hawk, I think more so than Animal, is the one that he credits with giving him the idea. So he ends up speaking, Austin does, with Joe Marshall. You might know him as J-Mar. And he has him create this custom championship for him. There were 2 versions made, one gold and one silver. Austin kept the silver one for himself, and he used the gold one on TV, without even telling Vince McMahon about it this first night here that he brought it out on Raw. And Vince McMahon was not happy. He told him to stop using it, and he wanted him to revert back to the Big Eagle. But they got so many fan requests and feedback on the Smoking Skull belt that they brought it back. Also on this show, Brackus wrestled his final televised match for WWE, beating Jesus Castillo of Los Boricuas in under a minute. Never to be seen again. I don't even have any recollection of Brackus having one match, let alone multiple matches on TV. I remember the vignettes. But yes, Brackus did not last very long. WWE also taped the premiere episode this night of Sunday Night Heat from Anaheim, airing 5 days later. Originally, this was only intended to run for about 6 weeks in the build-up to the Highway to Hell SummerSlam that year. But the show proved to be so successful and so popular that USA kept it on the air. And typically on pay-per-view nights, Heat would be kind of what now would be the kickoff show. Heat would end up serving as the pre-show. Heat was on fire, pun intended, for a while there. There was an episode in March of '99, a regular episode of Heat, that did a 5.1 Nielsen rating for Heat. It did a 5.1. But the highest rated episode was the Halftime Heat special that year. That popped to 6.6 for the Rock versus Mankind Empty Arena match. But this first episode was also Shane McMahon's debut on television, outside of his brief appearances in the early 90s, maybe late 80s, as referee Shane Stevens. You can even see him as one of the referees trying to hold back Miss Elizabeth as she walks down to the ring in the middle of the Randy Savage-Ric Flair match at WrestleMania 8. There's Shane. 21 years ago this week, on July 30th, 2000, I-Generation Superstars of Wrestling taped its one and only pay-per-view event called RODMAN DOWN UNDER, one of the worst shows of all time, from the Superdome in Sydney, before a crowd of 10,000. How many of those actually paid to get into the building, I don't know, but supposedly there was around 10,000 people in the building. I would say 10,000 unlucky spectators in the crowd that night. Superstars of Wrestling, it was this group that formed, and they held a series of shows in Australia that year, featuring various wrestling legends and the legend himself, Dennis Rodman, who they signed to a deal. Per the Observer write-up at the time, Rodman was flown to Australia a week early to do publicity, but partied so much on his first night that he missed all of his scheduled media appearances. Which sounds about right. 2 days before this pay-per-view, Rodman no-showed the autograph session at the show that night, but he did do, kind of did, the planned run-in for him, which was to set up his match on the 30th against Curt Hennig. And so the planned finish here, we're talking 2 days earlier now, the planned finish of the match between Curt Hennig and Brutus Beefcake to determine the first ever Superstars of Wrestling World Champion, the plan was for Rodman to come out about midway through the match and attack Hennig, which would lead to a pull-apart, and that would build up their match after Hennig would later go on to win the title. Rodman, not surprisingly, arrived late, but he at least showed up in time to run out when the match was already over. But Hennig and Rodman actually had what was said to be the best match on the show in Sydney on this night, ending with what was described as a very lame finish when both men punched the referee after just 5 minutes. Hennig played the heel, fans booed the hell out of Rodman, and the guys did a double turn. Bret Hart and Steve Austin, this was not. Other matches on the card, the Road Warriors beat Public Enemy in an elimination tables match to win the I-Generation Tag Team Championship. Public Enemy would win the belts back just 4 days later. The Barbarian defeated Brute Force, which was Brutus the Barber Beefcake, in a hardcore match. Sweet Destiny beat Brandy Wine. One Man Gang defeated Tatanka to win the I-Generation Australian Championship after Tatanka had won the title 2 days earlier. And in the main event, Curt Hennig defeated Dennis Rodman by disqualification in an Australian Outback match to retain the I-Generation World Heavyweight Championship that he had won from Beefcake 2 days prior. Hennig would lose the belt to the Barbarian 3 days later, who would hold the belt for all of 1 day before dropping it back to Curt, and he would be the last holder of that title. This show would not air in the United States until December. And by that point, the promotion had been disbanded. 19 years ago this week, on July 27th, 2002, at Ring of Honor's Crowning a Champion event at the Murphy Rec Center in Philadelphia, Low Key defeated Spanky, Christopher Daniels, and Doug Williams in a 4-way 60-minute Iron Man match to become the first ever Ring of Honor World Champion, a reign that would last a total of 56 days. 17 years ago this week, on July 26, 2004, Monday Night Raw from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania featured only 2 matches. Chris Benoit defeated Triple H 4 falls to 3 in a 60-minute Iron Man match to retain the World Heavyweight Championship. Benoit was down 3 falls to 1. He tied the match at about 48 minutes with the crossface and then won it with a pinfall over Triple H following a rock bottom by Eugene with just 6 seconds remaining in the match. I believe this was the last 60-minute Iron Man match that WWE aired on free television, because the Angle Lesnar one on SmackDown came the year before this. And I know they did some other Iron Man matches on pay-per-view, like with Cena and Orton, but that wasn't on free TV. So I think this was the last 60-minute one on free television until last year's 4-way Iron Man match on NXT with Adam Cole, Finn Balor, Johnny Gargano, and Tommaso Ciampa, which ended in a damn draw. But the only other match on this show was Randy Orton winning a 20-man battle royal for a World Heavyweight Championship match at SummerSlam. 15 years ago this week, on August 1st, 2006, ECW on Sci-Fi aired live from the Hammerstein Ballroom in New York City, the last time WWE ran that venue, which is a great venue. I always loved being inside Hammerstein, although I was not at this show. But I always had fun, especially at all the Ring of Honor shows I was at in that building. So I wish they would go back there for shows, but you can see why. They may have soured on the Hammerstein experience based on what happened here on this night. CM Punk made his WWE in-ring debut with a submission win over Justin Credible. But the reason the show is most remembered for is the main event between Big Show and Batista. Because nothing screams ECW like Batista and the Big Show wrestling for the ECW World Championship. Both men got booed throughout the entire match. There were very vocal chants of boring, same old shit, and change the channel. It ended with a DQ win for Batista. It would be WWE's, and by the way, nothing screams disqualification more than ECW, apparently. But it would be WWE's final appearance, as I mentioned, in the Hammerstein, but you can't really blame the fans for this one, because it was only a few months later that ECW December to Dismember took place on pay-per-view, and that show was a colossal failure. It did so poorly that it led to a planned third one-night stand show at the Hammerstein in 2007 being canceled. 13 years ago this week, on July 28th, 2008, the first Monday Night Raw of the PG era aired after the shift from TV 14 to TV PG was announced the Tuesday before. Also on this show, announcer Mike Adamle was announced by Shane McMahon as the new general manager of Raw in a very awkward moment before Adamle then announced that Batista would wrestle John Cena at SummerSlam. WWE recognized that Adamle's run as an announcer was just a fucking failure, and this was their way of trying to justify his reported $300,000 a year salary. That's what they were paying him on his contract per year, $300,000 for really working part-time. They had to do something with him to try to justify that kind of contract, and it did not work. And just 3 months later, Adamle was gone. You know, originally they brought Adamle into the company, and I remember when he was hired, I was actually kind of excited because I knew Mike Adamle, not really from his football days, but I knew him as the host of American Gladiators. It was him and Larry Zonka, and I used to watch American Gladiators usually after Superstars would air. Locally here in New York on Channel 5 is where I used to watch it every Saturday. Very, very faithfully, I would watch American Gladiators. So that's how I knew him, and I thought, man, that's a great pickup. I mean, I know it's been a while. But this is great. And then they brought him in, and it wasn't so great. It wasn't so great. But they brought him into the company and made him the lead announcer on ECW with the idea that he would learn on the job, and he would eventually replace Jim Ross. He was brought in as Jim Ross's replacement. Think about that. But 4 years ago, he was diagnosed with dementia and CTE, which might help explain a lot of his flubs on TV and kind of makes it a little less humorous in hindsight if that had anything to do with it. 8 years ago this week, on the August 1st, 2013 Impact Wrestling episode from Wichita Falls, Texas, Tito Ortiz made his return to TNA as the infamous August 1st warning in front of a crowd that did not give a shit. But credit to Impact, though. It is rare to get a reverse pop. I've heard of big pops. I've heard of Stone Cold pops, Road Warrior pops. It's very rare that you see a reverse pop, which is what this got. But they managed to pull it off here on this show. Ortiz had appeared, I said return because he had appeared in TNA previously in 2005 as a referee for a pair of NWA World title matches. On pay-per-view. He reffed the Jeff Jarrett AJ Styles match at Hard Justice and the Jeff Jarrett Rhino match at Bound for Glory. So this was technically his return. But the whole hashtag August 1st warning thing, as they called it, I mean, this was promoted very heavily on their programming and social media for weeks in advance, hyping up some kind of big surprise, some kind of mystery man. And Ortiz walks out, right? This music starts playing. Actually, the lights went out first, but then this music starts playing. And you've got the Main Event Mafia out there, and Aces and Eights are out there. But then, you know, we see Tito Ortiz walk out. And he's just standing on the ramp with his arms crossed. And it got literally no reaction. And meanwhile, all the wrestlers at ringside, all the guys from the Mafia and Aces and Eights, they had to stand around and pretend to be shocked. Ken Anderson's attempt to sell the shock of the moment is still a meme to this day. He looked like he just remembered he left the fucking stove on in his house. But the orders to bring in Ortiz, they did not come from Impact. This was something that came from the executives at Spike TV. Because this was done as a way to promote an upcoming Bellator fight between Ortiz and Quinton Rampage Jackson, who was also in the ring that night. He had been doing some stuff with Impact. They were going to be having a fight on pay-per-view. It was a fight that never took place because Ortiz got injured days before the fight. But if you look at this whole thing, Ortiz ended up turning on the Main Event Mafia to join Aces and Eights. And then all of a sudden, he and Quinton were pulled from TNA programming by Bellator. Bellator wanted him off TV, which rendered this whole August 1 warning thing entirely pointless. But to their credit, Impact every August 1st on their Twitter, they do wish everybody a happy August 1 warning anniversary, and they link to the clip, so they are openly aware of the fact that it sucked, but they have embraced it. They don't shy away from it. They have some fun with it. So that's pretty cool. 6 years ago this week, on the July 27th, 2015 episode of Raw from Oklahoma City, John Cena beat Seth Rollins to retain his United States Championship. Rollins' WWE title was not on the line in the match. This is the match where Rollins kneed Cena in the face and broke his nose. He didn't just break his nose, he moved it about 3 inches over on the side of his face. It looked awful. And Cena underwent surgery a few days later for a nasal fracture, but ended up being pulled from several live events. He returned the Friday before SummerSlam that year at a house show in Bridgeport, in Connecticut. And 1 year ago this week, on July 31st, 2020, The Fiend attacked Alexa Bliss. There was a match on this show in the main event in the Empty Performance Center in Orlando on SmackDown between Bayley and Nikki Cross. And Bayley beat Nikki. Nikki was very frustrated when the match was over, and Alexa, who she was friends with on TV at that time, was trying to console her. And Nikki shoved Alexa down on her ass, and she walked out. All of a sudden, the lights go out. And now we see when the red light comes on, Alexa is sitting in the ring terrified, and standing behind her is The Fiend, who circles around her and kneels down beside her and puts his glove up in the air, the hurt glove, brings it to her mouth, and he applies the mandible claw. We got man-on-woman violence here at the end of this show. Bray Wyatt playing head games in a storyline with Braun Strowman, who had, an affection for Alexa, and I think they were partners in that mixed match challenge thing, so he was trying to fuck with Braun Strowman, basically, in their feud, by going after Alexa Bliss. And here we are, 1 year later, Alexa Bliss is the new Fiend. And 1 year later, on this very day, Bray Wyatt was served his walking papers by WWE. And that is this week in wrestling history.